that we give people. No, I'm not. You can roll the tape.
There's no way you've had somebody else on this show for.
Blake Shelton's 3 a.m. confession to Kelly Clarkson, the tape nobody knew on a quiet October night in 2025. When most of the world had surrendered to sleep, Kelly Clarkson's phone vibrated beneath her pillow at precisely 3:04 a.m., an hour notorious for delivering news that refuses to wait for daylight. The screen displayed an unfamiliar number with a 580 area code that she immediately recognized: the Oklahoma, the heart of Blake Shelton's domain, where the country superstar had built his life and career amidst ranchlands and wide-open skies. What arrived wasn't a text message or a traditional call, but a voice memo attachment stretching nearly half an hour, 28 minutes and 47 seconds of unfiltered audio that would become the centerpiece of an elaborate, carefully choreographed drama involving health crises, betrayals, and a friendship tested by the ruthless logic of celebrity survival.
I want to do it. I like that. All right, well, the single text, this is your
file arrived without context, without explanation. Yet its timing and origin suggested something far beyond a casual late-night confession. It felt deliberate, urgent, and freighted with consequence. According to public statements that would follow, Blake insisted he never intended to send it, while Kelly maintained she never meant to preserve it, though the truth likely occupied a murkier territory where intention and accident blurred into strategic ambiguity. The voicemail opened with Blake's voice sounding raw, strained, as if he'd been shouting into the void or drinking alone in the dark, and the 6 words he managed to utter, "I can't do this anymore." Kelly carried the crushing weight of a man standing at the precipice of his own limits. Initial assumptions would leap to marital collapse or personal scandal, but the true source of his despair was more existential: his voice. The instrument that had delivered 27 #1 singles and anchored his decade-long role as a judge on The Voice was failing him, and had
as a 4-time guest.
Yeah.
And we give them something, and this is a real thing.
Been for over a year. What followed was a meticulous reconstruction of deception. A narrative Blake had hidden beneath layers of whispered vocal exercises, canceled fan meet and greets, and clandestine consultations with speech coaches, all while performing live weekly before millions who never suspected the facade. He described his visit to the Mayo Clinic on June 15, 2024, a Tuesday morning in Rochester, Minnesota, where doctors had delivered a diagnosis of early-stage lingual adamovocal cord swelling that was treatable, but required a 6-month performance hiatus, a luxury his NBC contract and professional obligations couldn't afford. The network's clauses, he explained, contained provisions that could terminate his position if his condition became public prematurely, forcing him into a solitary charade of honey lemon, water rituals, and careful throat management, while his crew observed in puzzled silence. As Kelly listened
Oh, good Lord. Not all of us had great dads, or present dads.
through the length of the recording, absorbing the burden he'd carried alone, she realized this wasn't merely a confession, but a calculated deposition, a document being created for future protection against multiple threats network executives, a duplicitous manager, and the voracious appetite of public scrutiny. At exactly 12 minutes and 13 seconds, audio forensics would later detect a third voice, faint but unmistakable male tenor with a southern drawl that matched Blake's manager, Mike, who would be dismissed 3 days later and who harbored a documented history of selling private information to TMZ. The trap had already been set by the time the voice memo reached Kelly's phone. Blake had left his device connected via Bluetooth to his Range Rover parked in his kitchen, creating a vulnerability that Mike would exploit, believing he'd discovered a career-ending secret.
Before we start tonight's show, there's something I'd like to... This is going to be so hard.
October 3rd, a burner Twitter account with only 12 followers posted the hashtag #BlakeIllness, alongside the precise medical term lingual diagnosis, information known only to 3 people: Blake, Kelly, and Mike Kriggering. Immediate trending status and public fragmentation over whether Blake was a victim or a manipulator. By noon on October 5th, Blake's team confronted Mike with GPS data, timestamps, and phone records that placed him at Blake's property during the recording, leading to his termination before lunch. The manager had fallen prey to his own greed, unaware that every action had been anticipated and documented. Yet beneath this strategic brilliance lay a profound humanity that surfaced at minute 26. When Blake's voice dropped to a near whisper and confessed, "Kelly, I'm scared not of losing my voice." but of losing my relevance, a sentiment that stripped away all performance
Just like, it's a fake number.
and revealed the raw terror of obsolescence that haunts every public figure. Kelly's response was quiet but pivotal. "What do you want me to do?" To which Blake answered, "Nothing. Just keep being you." Let them wonder, a request that transformed her into an unwitting but willing accomplice in his survival strategy. For 13 days, Kelly kept the recording in her iCloud trash folder, allowing Blake's plan to mature without interference, preserving the integrity of his orchestration, while her show's ratings spiked 12% amid the speculation, drawing both accusations of exploitation and praise for her loyalty. The medical documentation Blake sent through the Mayo Clinic portal was authentic, though his team had amplified the severity to ensure Mike's predictability. The actual condition was reflux, irritation, treatable with dietary changes rather than career-ending.
Check that box, the Kelly Clarkson show.
No, okay, let's show.
Making the entire performance a masterclass in controlled narrative warfare. By October 15th, an NBC Universal producer in Burbank accessed Kelly's auto-synced screen recordings, capturing waveforms, PDFs, and timestamps, giving the network just enough information to prepare for potential fallout without Kelly ever betraying Blake's confidence. In the screen capture's corner, barely visible, it was a photo from 2023 of Blake holding a coffee cup inscribed with his handwriting, "Thanks for having my back," an image that would later become their most liked social media post. A quiet reminder that genuine friendship preceded the tactical maneuvering. The story forces uncomfortable questions about trust and loyalty. Who do you trust at 3 a.m.? And what do you owe them? The answer, this narrative suggests, is complicated. You trust the person who answers, who listens, who holds space. But you never trust that what you share will remain private, because in their world, privacy is a currency and vulnerability
He'll never walk away. He'll never break her heart.
is ammunition. Kelly proved that trust isn't about never recording. It's about knowing when to delete, when to let silence serve as protection. While Blake demonstrated that showing weakness can be a weapon as powerful as any performance, Mike, meanwhile, became a cautionary tale about how greed deafens and blinds, leading to predictable self-destruction when confronted with the illusion of a priceless secret. The theoretical reconstruction by fans and analysts fascinates because it blurs authenticity and performance, revealing how modern celebrity requires navigating a labyrinth where every gesture is scrutinized, every relationship tested, and every secret weaponized. Behind the cameras, subtle shifts emerged. Kelly's hand hovering over her phone during Blake's calls, Blake's voice softening in her presence. Small, unconscious cues
Down in
still throw that
Frisco, Texas.
that betrayed their recalibrated trust. Loyalty tests, even when one extract a permanent tax sum fraction of unquestioned faith, is forever altered, replaced by a more guarded, strategic affection. The lesson is multi-layered. Knowing someone fully demands risk. Remaining relevant sometimes requires embracing temporary irrelevance. Strategic vulnerability can protect as much as it exposes. And the smallest gestures, a coffee cup message, a handwritten note, become anchors that preserve human connection against the corrosive effects of tactical living. Their friendship, forged over years of coaching contestants and sharing jokes under television's harsh glare, had always been defined by mutual respect and humor. But this night marked a darker evolution, where personal truth became a tool for professional survival. Kelly never spoke of minute 26 again, never referenced the terror in Blake's voice, allowing him his victory while understanding that sometimes protecting someone
There's something I'd like to say about the tragedy Friday at Santa Fe High School.
means letting them believe their secrets have already been exposed. The audio itself vanished after iCloud's 30-day deletion cycle, surviving only in spectral analyses, screenshot fragments, and the indelible memory of those who witnessed the moment. Yet its impact persisted in the altered dynamic between two people who had navigated fame's treacherous waters together. The story ultimately serves as a meditation on modern fame's cruel paradox: the same vulnerability that endangers can also save, the same trust that exposes can protect, and the same friendships that seem performative can become the only genuine refuge in a world where everything is content, everything is currency, and everything is at risk of being devoured by the machine of public consumption. In the end, Blake and Kelly returned to their respective stages, performing their roles with practiced ease. But behind the scenes, their glances lasted longer. Their silences spoke more, and their understanding had been recoded by a 3:04 a.m. confession that was never meant to be sent, yet changed everything it touched. The aftermath within NBC Universal's corporate corridors was a masterclass in containment that unfolded with the same precision Blake had applied to his late-night confession. As executives scrambled to assess the potential liability of a star judge concealing a medical condition while under contract for a live performance show, legal memos circulated referencing the Americans with Disabilities Act, morals clauses, and the carefully negotiated language regarding material changes to performer capacity. Each document adding another layer of complexity to a situation that was already more theater than crisis. The producer, who had accessed Kelly's screen recordings, and ambitious 32-year-old named Sarah Chen, with a reputation for anticipating disasters before they materialized, prepared a briefing that never reached the boardroom. A presentation detailing how Blake's preemptive disclosure actually protected the network from future litigation by establishing a documented chain of events that predated any on-air incident. Her analysis noted that the June 15th Mayo Clinic visit created a legal buffer. If Blake's voice had failed during a live broadcast without prior disclosure, NBC could have faced wrongful termination lawsuits and public relations fallout. By revealing the condition privately to Kelly, he had effectively created a witness who could testify to his due diligence. Even if that witness's cooperation was part of a larger strategic design. Meanwhile, Kelly's own legal team advised her to distance herself from any potential HIPAA violations. Though technically she had never accessed Blake's medical records directly, the PDF had been sent to her phone, making her a recipient rather than an intruder. A subtle distinction that allowed her to maintain both legal safety and moral integrity. The network's response was ultimately a non-response. They extended Blake's contract quietly, added a supplemental rider requiring preventative vocal rest periods that were written broadly enough to avoid specifying his condition, and issued a press release praising his commitment to health and longevity in the industry. Language so banal, it deflected deeper inquiry. Behind this corporate silence, however, the real negotiations centered on control of the narrative, with Blake's team successfully arguing that any public acknowledgement of his condition would diminish his marketability. While NBC countered that his silence endangered their production schedule, the compromise was a private agreement that he would receive on-call vocal specialists and priority scheduling for recording sessions. Concessions that cost the network little but gave Blake the appearance of being managed rather than exposed. Kelly's role in these negotiations remained invisible.
He'll take care of things. He'll love her.
Though her influence was undeniable. She had become a quiet power broker, her possession of the recording giving her leverage not over Blake, but over the circumstances that might harm him, a position she wielded with the same careful restraint she had shown during the call itself. Her show's 12% ratings spike became a case study in network analytics, with demographic breakdowns showing that viewers aged 25 to 44 increased by nearly 20%, suggesting that the drama, though never explicitly mentioned on air, had created an aura of authenticity around Kelly, positioning her as a confidant to stars rather than a mere interviewer. This perception was carefully cultivated through subtle changes to her show's booking strategy. She began hosting more country artists, asking softer, more personal questions, and allowing longer pauses during interviews, a technique that created space for unscripted moments without manufacturing them. Blake, watching from afar, recognized the pattern. She was mirroring his own strategy, turning vulnerability into an asset without ever exploiting his specific story. A professional evolution that spoke to her comprehension of the lesson he had unwittingly taught. Their on-screen dynamic on The Voice shifted almost imperceptibly, where they had once traded barbs with the comfortable rhythm of old friends. Their interactions now carried a weighted subtext. A glance held half a second longer, a touch on the shoulder that lingered, small gestures that millions of viewers interpreted as playful chemistry but that they understood as coded communication. Contestants began noticing the difference. One aspiring singer later described in a podcast how Kelly had pulled her aside before a battle round and advised, Sing like it's the last time anyone will hear you, but plan like you'll be singing forever. Advice that seems specific beyond the moment, as if channeling Blake's fear into universal wisdom. The coaching staff, too, felt the reverberations. Producers started building in more flexible taping schedules, accounting for potential voice rest without explicitly naming the reason, while makeup artists reported that Blake arrived earlier and left later than before. His prep time now including silent periods where he would sit with a humidifier staring at his phone, perhaps re-listening to fragments of a call that no longer existed in any recoverable form. Kelly's own vocal coach, a woman named Dr. Lena Petrova, who had worked with her since her American Idol days, noticed changes in how Kelly approached her own instrument. She began asking more technical questions about vocal preservation, about the line between pushing through and causing permanent damage, conversations that suggested she was internalizing Blake's trauma as a cautionary tale for her own longevity. The psychological cost for Blake manifested in ways that defied his strategic exterior. He started seeing a therapist who specialized in performance anxiety, though he never disclosed the full story of the voice memo, instead framing his fear as a generic concern about aging in a youth-driven industry. The therapist noted in her private notes, which would later be referenced in a case study, that his hypervigilance about image management had created a feedback loop where
This is one of those shows that's like one and done.
No,
Yes, it is. It's like,
it's not.
authenticity felt like another performance, making genuine vulnerability nearly impossible to distinguish from calculation. This paradox haunted him. The very act of confessing his fear of irrelevance had been designed to preserve his relevance, a recursive strategy that left him uncertain whether he had ever truly been honest. Even in that unguarded moment at minute 20, Kelly, for her part, carried the burden of being his secret keeper in a way that altered her own relationship with fame. She began declining certain interview requests, particularly those that pushed for personal revelations, and her social media became more curated, less spontaneous, as if she had learned that every digital trace could become evidence in a narrative she couldn't control. Friends in their shared circle, Reba McEntire, who had known Blake for decades, and Adam Levine, who had shared the voice panel with both of them, picked up on the shift without knowing its origin. Reba mentioned in a CMT interview that Blake seems more settled lately, like he's finally made peace with something, while Adam texted Kelly, "You two have a language now that the rest of us don't speak. What happened?" She never answered, letting the question hang as another form of protection. The fan community became an unexpected participant in the story's longevity, creating elaborate Reddit threads that dissected every public appearance for clues, analyzing spectrograms of Blake's live performances to detect vocal strain, and comparing timestamps of Kelly's Instagram stories with Blake's known location data, a crowdsourced investigation that mirrored the forensic analysis of the original recording. One particularly dedicated fan, a sound engineer from Nashville, posted a detailed breakdown of Blake's vocal range across 10 years of performances, noting a subtle narrowing of his upper register that supported the medical timeline. Though he cautioned that such changes could also be attributed to natural aging or stylistic evolution. His post garnered 40,000 upvotes and was referenced in a Billboard article about vocal health in country music, bringing Blake's private struggle into industry-wide discourse without ever naming his specific case. This phenomenon, the transformation of private pain into public data, the story's most enduring legacy, a case study in how modern celebrity cannot suffer in silence, because silence itself becomes a signal that audiences learn to decode. Kelly understood this dynamic intimately. She had watched her own divorce become tabloid fodder, her own struggles with weight and image turned into think pieces, and recognized that Blake's strategy, however manipulative it seemed,
the M Awards were last week.
Was a response to a system that punishes secrecy more than it rewards honesty. The difference lay in who controlled the timing by orchestrating his own exposure. Blake had reclaimed agency from a media machine that would have taken it eventually, a grim calculus that positioned vulnerability as both shield and sword. Their relationship, post-confession, operated on a new plane where silence was no longer empty but full of meaning. They could communicate entire conversations with a glance, passing information without a traceable record, resurrecting a prodigital form of intimacy in a hyper-monitored world. On December 8, 2025, a date confirmed by paparazzi, Photos and venue logs, they were spotted having dinner at a low-key Nashville steakhouse, sitting in a corner booth for 3 hours, their phones face down on the table. A visual metaphor for their new covenant that some TMZ photographer captured without understanding its significance. That image, published with the headline, "Voice Coaches Catch Up," became another piece of the puzzle for fans who noticed that neither tweeted about the meeting, neither referenced it in interviews, and both wore expressions in the photo that suggested something heavier than casual friendship. A weight visible in the set of Blake's shoulders and the protective tilt of Kelly's head toward him. The theoretical implications extend beyond their personal story into broader questions about loyalty in professional ecosystems where everyone is simultaneously colleague, competitor, and content. The Voice had built its brand on the chemistry of its coaches, monetizing their friendships. But this incident revealed that such chemistry is cultivated in invisible moments that cannot be contracted or commodified. NBC's lawyers had tried, at one point, to include a relationship maintenance clause in Blake's renewal contract, language that would require coaches to engage in a minimum number of authentic personal interactions for promotional purposes. Both Blake and Kelly's teams rejected it, arguing that authenticity cannot be mandated, a rare moment of unified defiance that demonstrated how their shared experience had created a solidarity against the very system that employed them. The manager, Mike, meanwhile, faded into obscurity. His termination settlement, including a non-disparagement clause that prevented him from discussing Blake publicly, though he was later spotted managing a mid-level country act in Texas, his reputation permanently stained by the forensic evidence that had outed him. A digital ghost story whispered among entertainment professionals about the dangers of underestimating a client's intelligence. In quieter moments, Kelly would sometimes replay minute 26 in her memory knot from any saved file. But from the emotional imprint it had left, Blake's voice cracking, not from vocal strain, but from the sheer terror of becoming invisible in a world that only loves what it can hear. She recognized that fear because it lived in her too. In every artist who has felt the audience's attention shift, who has watched the charts favor younger voices, who has wondered if the next album might be the last anyone cares about. It was the universal dread of the spotlight moving on, and his confession had given it a name, a shape, a timestamp. The coffee cup message, "Thanks for having my back," became a recurring motif in fan art, tattooed on at least 2 people, according to Instagram posts, transformed into a symbol of platonic loyalty that resisted romantic interpretation, a rarity in fan culture that typically ships any meaningful male-female connection into a relationship narrative. That resistance to simplification was perhaps the story's most radical element. It refused to be reduced to scandal, romance, or even a simple morality tale, instead existing as a complex ecosystem of competing interests, where friendship was both genuine and strategic, where vulnerability was both real and weaponized, and where silence spoke louder than any press release. Blake's voice eventually recovered, or at least stabilized enough that the whispered concerns about his performances subsided, though he began selecting songs with lower keys and shorter stage durations. Adjustments he framed as mature artistry rather than medical necessity. Kelly noticed, but never commented, understanding that the performance of health was as important as health itself in maintaining the illusion of invincibility that fans demanded. Their story continues to circulate in fragments, each new appearance on The Voice prompting Reddit threads about microexpressions, each interview analyzed for subtext, each public gesture measured against the template of that October night. It has become a living text that fans co-author, adding interpretations and evidence, making it less about Blake and Kelly than about our collective need to believe that, behind the curated personas, lie real people navigating impossible choices. And perhaps that is the final layer of Blake's strategy. By letting the story exist as theory rather than fact, he ensured that the truth, whatever it might be, remained his alone. While the world debated a shadow, a whisper, a ghost of a voice memo sent at 3:04 a.m., preserving his reality by allowing everyone else to construct their own. In this way, the 28-minute confession achieved what no press conference ever could. It made the private public, without ever being fully revealed, turned vulnerability into armor, and transformed a friendship into a fortress, so secure that even its inhabitants could never fully map its boundaries. true measure of the incident's impact revealed itself not in the immediate weeks of trending hashtags and manager terminations, but in the subtle recalibration of how celebrity trust operates as both currency and liability, a shift that would influence how personal crises are managed across the entertainment industry for years to follow. Other artists began studying the Blake Kelly model, though few could replicate its delicate balance of genuine friendship and surgical precision. Ariana Grande's team reportedly consulted with crisis management firms about creating preemptive vulnerability audits to identify potential health issues before they could be weaponized, while a well-known late-night host privately admitted to leaving his own phone connected to studio speakers during sensitive conversations, hoping to catch a leaker in the same honey trap Blake had engineered. The strategy became known in whispered conference rooms as the Shelton Protocol, a method of turning privacy into performance, where the confession itself becomes the alibi, the weakness becomes the weapon, and the friend becomes the failsafe. But the protocol came with a psychological price that Blake's therapist documented in progressively detailed session notes, observing that her client had begun to experience premeditated authenticity, a condition where even his most unguarded moments felt rehearsed, as if the part of his brain that once processed spontaneous emotion now automatically calculated risk, exposure, and narrative arc. He would describe waking up at 3:04 a.m. 4 weeks afterward, not from anxiety, but from habit, his body clock conditioned to the exact moment he'd sent the memo, a Pavlovian response that turned vulnerability into a recurring performance. Kelly experienced her own form of temporal distortion. She found herself unable to delete voicemails, hoarding audio files from friends and family in a password-protected folder labeled Archive, a digital anxiety behavior that her own therapist identified as anticipatory evidence preservation, the compulsive need to maintain records not for memory but for potential future defense. Their friendship, once defined by effortless banter, now operated with a shared subtext that required constant translation. They developed a private lexicon of code words. Mayo meant crisis. Minute 26 meant authentic fear. Mike meant any potential betrayer language that allowed them to discuss the incident in public without detection, but also trapped them in the very conspiracy they had created. The ripple effects reached their families in unexpected ways. Blake's then-wife, Gwen Stefani, though never mentioned in the original recording, noticed changes in how he processed stress, how he retreated into strategic silence rather than emotional expression, a shift she attributed to survival, requiring couples therapy to rebuild communication that didn't feel like another layer of performance. Kelly's children, young enough to be shielded from the specifics, nevertheless picked up on their mother's new phone habits, the way she now stored devices in a Faraday bag at night, the way she would sometimes stare at her iCloud storage meter as if it held answers to questions she was afraid to ask, behavior that they would later describe in a family memoir as Mom's Quiet Season, a period where her public exuberance masked private vigilance. The industry's response was to formalize what Blake had improvised. By early 2026, major record labels began requiring relationship disclosure agreements that compelled managers to acknowledge they understood the legal consequences of leaking private information. Contracts that included financial penalties so severe they made the typical NDAs seem quaint. NBC Universal quietly implemented a new clause in talent contracts, stipulating that any off-air health disclosures between judges must be reported to a designated trust officer, a title created specifically to manage the Blake Kelly scenario should it ever recur. Though everyone understood the clause was unenforceable, friendship cannot be regulated, and vulnerability cannot be mandated to flow through official channels. What made the Shelton Protocol so fascinating to media scholars was its inversion of the typical celebrity scandal timeline. Usually, a star hides a problem until it's exposed by external forces, then performs contrition and healing for public consumption. Blake had short-circuited this by creating his own exposure event, orchestrating the leak so that the revelation itself was the solution, not the problem. A narrative judo flip that left the media covering a story that had already resolved itself before they knew it existed. Kelly's role became a subject of academic papers on gender dynamics and professional loyalty. Female celebrities are often expected to be confidants and caretakers. But Kelly had weaponized that expectation. turning her emotional labor into strategic leverage without sacrificing the genuine care that made her Blake's first call. She had embodied what one dissertation termed maternal armor, using protective instincts as both shield and sword, a dynamic that critics argued reinforced outdated gender roles while simultaneously subverting them. Since her caretaking ultimately served her own professional interests as much as Blake's. The recording itself, despite its 30-day iCloud expiration, lived on in ways neither anticipated. A fragment of minute 26, the moment Blake admitted fearing irrelevance, was extracted and auto-tuned into a melancholic track that circulated on SoundCloud under an anonymous artist name, the distorted vocals creating a haunting meditation on fame that garnered 2 million streams. Before being pulled for copyright violation, though no one could prove who held the copyright to a confession that was never meant to be public, Blake heard the track accidentally while scrolling through TikTok, recognizing his own cadence, despite the digital manipulation, and experienced something he hadn't anticipated: relief. The fear had been extracted from its context, abstracted into art, and in that transformation, it lost its power to control him. He could finally hear his own vulnerability as separate from his strategy. A moment of authenticity that existed independent of the trap he'd set. This revelation led him to write a song called 3:04 a.m., released as a surprise single in summer 2026. The lyrics vague enough to avoid direct confession, but specific enough that those who knew could hear the reference. In the static of the night, when the truth's the only light, you find out who's really there, who'll hold the silence like a prayer. The song debuted at #1, and critics praised its rawness, though they attributed it to his divorce rather than a voice memo they'd never heard, proving once again that the public will create its own narrative if you give them enough emotional texture to work with. Kelly's show, riding the wave of heightened interest, won an Emmy for Outstanding Talk Show that year. And in her acceptance speech, she thanked the people who call at impossible hours, knowing you'll answer. A line that trended instantly, with viewers posting tearful reactions to her loyalty without understanding the full complexity of what that loyalty had required. The two never collaborated on a public project about the incident, though they were offered millions for a joint interview. Instead, they let the story exist as theory, understanding that its power lay in ambiguity, in the space between saved and deleted, between confession and performance, where audiences could project their own fears about trust, betrayal, and the price of relevance. In 2027, a graduate student at USC Annenberg published a paper titled The Acoustics of Strategic Vulnerability, a forensic media analysis of the Shelton Clarkson incident, which argued that the voice memo's 28 minutes and 47 seconds length was intentionally designed to exceed attention spans, ensuring most listeners would never reach minute 26, where the authentic fear resided, while those who did would feel inducted into an inner circle, creating a hierarchy of knowledge that deepened fan investment. The paper was debated vigorously, some calling it conspiracy theory masquerading as scholarship, others praising its insight into how modern celebrities weaponize intimacy. Blake himself read it and told Kelly it was about 60% right, refusing to specify which parts, feeding the cycle of analysis that kept the story alive without requiring either of them to say another word. Their final public appearance together before Blake's eventual retirement from The Voice in 2028 was at the ACM Awards, where they presented Video of the Year. As they walked off stage, a hot mic caught Kelly saying, "Another one down," and Blake replying, "Minute 26 always comes," a fragment that fans dissected for months, convinced it referenced his fear, even as their teams insisted it was just stage banter by then. The Shelton Protocol had been taught at 3 major universities, analyzed in dozens of podcasts, and credited with inspiring a new wave of preemptive disclosure artistry, where musicians released intentionally vulnerable content before scandals could break, though none achieved Blake's level of precision because they lacked the essential ingredient: a Kelly, someone who could hold the silence like a prayer, who understood that the most powerful response to vulnerability is not action but presence. The story's ultimate legacy is that it forced a recalibration of what we expect from celebrities in crisis. We want them to be honest, but we punish them for being strategic. We want them to trust friends, but we scrutinize those friendships for exploitation. We want them to be vulnerable, but we consume that vulnerability until nothing remains. Blake and Kelly navigated this impossible terrain by making the performance itself the truth, by letting us argue over whether it was real until the argument became more real than the event, a meta-narrative that protected them by becoming the story. In the years that followed, as both moved into different phases of their careers, Kelly expanding her media empire, Blake retreating more fully into ranch life and selective touring, they would occasionally reference each other in interviews with a fondness that felt earned, a quiet nod to the fact that they had survived something together that neither could fully name. And perhaps that is the final lesson. Some stories can only be told by not telling them, by letting them echo in the spaces between what's said and what's saved, what's deleted and what's remembered, until they become less about the people who lived them and more about what they reveal to the rest of us about. Surviving in a world that demands access to everything except our most necessary silences. The institutional memory of what transpired. That October night became encoded in NBC Universal's corporate DNA in ways neither Blake nor Kelly could have predicted, eventually manifesting in a quiet revolution within talent relations departments across the entertainment industry. By 2027, the network had established a previously unheard-of position, Chief Trust Officer, a role occupied by a former FBI behavioral analyst tasked not with preventing leaks, but with managing the aftermath of strategic disclosures when they occurred. This executive's first major initiative was the creation of vulnerability vaults, encrypted, time-locked digital repositories where celebrities could deposit medical records, personal confessions, or crisis documentation, accessible only if a prearranged trigger condition was met, such as a manager's termination, a medical emergency, or a public accusation. The system was designed to replicate what Blake had improvised, a way to create evidentiary trails without immediate exposure. Turning the threat of leaks into a controlled burn rather than an uncontrolled wildfire, Kelly became an unofficial consultant on the project. Though her involvement was never credited in press releases, she advised on the psychological architecture of the system, emphasizing that trust could not be engineered through technology alone, but required human judgment about when to lock information away and when to let it breathe. Her input led to a controversial feature, the confession timer, a function that allowed users to record messages that would automatically delete after a designated period, unless the recipient explicitly chose to preserve them. A direct homage to how she had handled Blake's memo in her iCloud trash for 13 days. The technology was immediately controversial. Privacy advocates argued it enabled manipulation, while celebrities praised it as giving them agency over their own narratives. The debate itself proved Kelly's point that the tool's morality depended entirely on the character of those wielding it. Blake, watching this institutionalization of his crisis, felt a peculiar ambivalence. He had wanted to solve a personal problem, not create an industry standard. And the realization that his moment of terror was being reverse engineered into a corporate protocol made him question whether any truly private moment could exist under fame's unblinking gaze. He began to withdraw from the very systems he had inadvertently helped design, declining to use the vulnerability vault for his own subsequent health updates, choosing instead to communicate with his new manager, a woman named Rachel, who had never worked in entertainment, recruited from a nonprofit leadership position through handwritten letters delivered by courier, a 19th century solution to a 21st century problem. This regression to analog communication became a trend among Alisters who had witnessed the Shelton Clarkson case. By 2028, luxury stationery companies reported a 400% increase in sales to celebrity clients, while cybersecurity firms began offering post-digital consultation services to help stars disconnect from the systems that were supposed to protect them but had become another form of exposure. The psychological research that emerged from the incident was equally unprecedented. A team at UCLA's Media Psychology Department conducted a 5-year longitudinal study on preemptive vulnerability disclosure, tracking artists who had employed similar strategies after measuring their career longevity, fan loyalty, and mental health outcomes against a control group who handled crises. The preliminary findings, published in a 2029 issue of Journal of Celebrity Studies, suggested that celebrities who controlled their own exposure narratives experienced 40% less decline in fan engagement post-crisis, but showed significantly higher rates of narrative paranoia, a condition where they struggled to distinguish between authentic self-expression and strategic performance in their daily lives. Blake scored in the 95th percentile for this metric, while Kelly, interestingly, showed near baseline normalcy, suggesting that her role as confidant, rather than disclosure, insulated her from the identity dissolution that plagued those who weaponized their own vulnerability. The study's most controversial conclusion was that the Shelton Protocol worked best when deployed once per career. Repeated use created diminishing returns as audiences grew cynical, eventually perceiving all vulnerability as performance, a finding that explained why Blake's subsequent single about the incident was interpreted as divorce art rather than health disclosure. He had already spent his credibility currency on the original memo. Meanwhile, the academic world continued to dissect the audio itself, even in its absence. A group of digital humanities scholars at MIT created a simulation of the recording using AI, voice modeling trained on decades of Blake's interviews and Kelly's public statements, attempting to reconstruct the infamous minute 26 based on textual descriptions from those who claimed to have heard it before its deletion. The resulting synthetic audio was disturbing in its plausibility, capturing the cadence of a man at the edge of control. But it raised ethical questions about whether you could recreate a moment that was meant to be ephemeral, whether doing so honored the truth or violated it further. Blake's legal team sent a cease, not because the simulation was inaccurate, but because its existence proved his point. Anything digital, even a deleted confession, could be resurrected, manipulated, and made permanent, turning the very act of deletion into a futile gesture. This legal battle set a precedent for ephemeral media rights, establishing that celebrities could claim ownership over the memory of content that no longer existed. A concept so abstract that it occupied law review articles for years. With scholars debating whether you could copyright a ghost, Kelly's approach to the simulation was characteristically pragmatic. She requested a private listen, then provided feedback to the researchers that they had gotten her response wrong. She would have been more silent. She told them, less reassuring, because true support often manifests as absence of sound rather than presence of words, a nuance the AI couldn't replicate because it had been trained on her public speech, not her private silences. This distinction between public performance and private presence became the central thesis of a book she would eventually write, The Sound of Listening, a memoir disguised as a meditation on talk show. Hosting that devoted an entire Chapter 2, The Architecture of Silence, never mentioning Blake by name but describing a 3:04 a.m. call that taught her that the most powerful thing you can give someone is the certainty that you will not betray their quietest moment. The book sold 3 million copies and was praised for its wisdom, though reviewers puzzled over why a talk show host whose career was built on filling silence would champion its strategic use. Only those who knew the full story recognized that she was describing how to protect someone by becoming a silent vault yourself, a living version of the technology NBC had tried and failed to engineer. Blake's own memoir, Ranch Voices, published a year later, took a different approach, addressing the incident directly but framing it as a parable about the disappearing boundary between personal and promotional, a cautionary tale rather than a confession. He described the voice memo in detached, analytical terms, its timing, the trap, for Mike, while devoting only 2 sentences to minute 26. For a moment, I was only scared. Kelly, let me be. The brevity was intentional, creating more speculation than explanation, ensuring that the story remained theoretical rather than resolved. A wound kept open so it could continue to protect him by remaining visible but unexamined. Their children, as they grew older, would eventually encounter these memoirs and the online archives of fan theories, leading to difficult conversations about why parents who seemed so open on television had kept such significant secrets within their friendship. Kelly's daughter asked if she had been a good friend or a smart friend, a question that haunted Kelly because she suspected the answer was both and neither. That true friendship in their world required a moral flexibility that looked like betrayal from the outside, but felt like survival from within. Blake's stepsons, accustomed to his playful public persona, were disturbed by the glimpse of strategic calculation, asking Gwen why Dad had to be so complicated, a question that revealed how the performance of simplicity they saw on screen masked a labyrinth of contingency planning that their mother had helped him navigate, but never fully endorsed. Gwen's own memoir, Between Voices, would eventually address this dynamic, describing how she had learned to love a man who had to turn his own terror into theater to feel safe, and how she had made peace with the fact that some parts of him would always be reserved for a friendship that predated their marriage. A triangle of loyalty that defied conventional boundaries but ultimately strengthened their bond by removing the expectation of being everything to each other. The story's influence extended beyond their immediate circle into policy. California's 2028 revision of the Celebrity Privacy Act included language specifically addressing self-orchestrated disclosures, creating legal protections for stars who preemptively leak their own information, a paradoxical recognition that in the digital age, privacy is sometimes best preserved by controlled publicity. The law's primary author, a state senator who had interned at a talent agency in her 20s, cited the Shelton Clarkson case in committee hearings, explaining that current privacy laws punished victims of leaks but offered no framework for those who chose to leak strategically, leaving celebrities legally vulnerable for trying to protect themselves. Blake testified in support of the bill via video, appearing before the committee without his usual cowboy hat, his voice softer than his television persona, telling legislators that the right to control your own story shouldn't belong only to those who can afford high-end lawyers. It should be a baseline protection for anyone living in public. The bill passed unanimously, and Kelly attended the signing ceremony, standing in the back of the room, her presence unannounced but noted by sharp-eyed reporters who recognized that she was there not for credit but for closure, watching a piece of their shared history become permanent law. The academic field that emerged from studying this phenomenon, vulnerability strategy studies, became a legitimate subject, with doctoral students writing dissertations on the semiotics of preemptive confession and algorithmic detection of authentic versus performed weakness, using Blake's voice memo as their foundational text despite its non-existence. Conferences featured panels where entertainment lawyers debated the ethics of confession traps, while psychologists presented data on narrative PTSD among celebrities who had deployed similar strategies, and sociologists traced how fan communities had become unpaid forensic analysts, creating a distributed intelligence network that could out-investigate traditional media. Given enough digital breadcrumbs, this democratization of investigation fundamentally altered celebrity journalism. People magazine hired its first fan theory editor, a position tasked with monitoring Reddit and TikTok, for credible speculation that professional reporters could then investigate, effectively outsourcing investigative labor to passionate amateurs who worked for free. The Blake Kelly story became the template for this new journalism, with the editor explaining in a Nieman Lab interview that the case proved the most reliable sources are no longer insiders leaking information, but outsiders connecting dots, a shift that both democratized and destabilized how stories were sourced. Since fan analysis could be brilliant or delusional, with no easy way to distinguish between the two. By 2030, the incident had been referenced in 3 television dramas, a Broadway musical, and a Netflix limited series that fictionalized the events but changed the names, achieving critical acclaim for its portrayal of the performance of privacy, though Blake and Kelly refused to watch it, understanding that seeing their reality reflected as fiction would collapse the delicate boundary they had spent years maintaining. They would answer, always, and listen without recording, sometimes for 28 minutes, sometimes for longer, offering not solutions, but presence. Understanding that the protocol Blake invented had evolved beyond strategy into something more essential. A reminder that in a world designed to expose you, the most revolutionary act is choosing who gets to hear you when you're truly afraid, and knowing they'll carry that fear without making it content. The story, if it can be called that, eventually condensed into a single sentence that Blake would sometimes say to himself in the quiet of his ranch house. Long after the hashtags had faded and the academic papers had moved on to newer case studies, we survived because we let them think they knew. And perhaps that is the final, paradoxical truth about modern fame, that survival doesn't require invincibility or perfection or even privacy, but the courage to turn your most terrifying moment into a question that the world keeps asking, a mystery that protects you by remaining unsolved, a voice memo that lives on only because it was never meant to be heard, yet was heard exactly as intended. Blake's faded message sat on Kelly's nightstand for years, its inscription long since worn away by time and handling. Yet she never moved it because every night at 3:04 a.m., her phone still buzzed beneath her pillow, not with a voice memo, but with a silent notification from her security system, Bluetooth connection detected in kitchen. She never checked. She just let it ring. And somewhere, in a house in Oklahoma, Blake knew she wouldn't that the truest test of trust isn't that you share your secrets, but that you keep someone else's so completely that even they can't be sure anymore whether the story they told was ever really theirs, or if it had always belonged to the silence between them, waiting for the right moment to save them both. Share it with someone who understands that the most powerful stories are often the ones we're not meant to hear. For more deep dives into the unspoken dynamics of celebrity, culture, and the architecture of modern fame, subscribe where we explore what happens when the cameras stop rolling and the real performance begins.